Welcome back to the Weekend Ball Podcast. My name is Alex Adams, and after we're here live right after Canada loses 86-82 to Japan in a somewhat of a do or die game. And unfortunately, now their hopes are resting on the shoulders of a lot of Spanish women in Hungary, and hopefully they can win. So that's when we're recording this. So obviously, probably know somewhat of the result by the time this gets out. But I'm really lucky to be joined by someone who knows the women's game really well in this country, Oren Weisfeld. Thanks so much for taking the time and doing this, even though it's not maybe the most fun conversation we'll have, but it should be an insightful one.
No, thanks for having me, man. Appreciate the kind words. And yeah, a little bit of a disappointing morning for us in Canada. For sure. Hopefully the Spanish pull out the win against Hungary. Unfortunately, they don't have a lot of motivation because they already qualified with the Canada loss. But hey, there's always like FIBA rankings to play for. It's not like they're just gonna completely give up. So yeah, we'll see it as we do this pod. I'll be checking up on the score and we'll see what happens.
Just what do you think really went wrong today? It felt as though the defense was really a miss, especially in the first half. Their offense got clogged. They got into foul trouble. What were some of the things that you think Canada was just maybe not sharp enough today?
Yeah, first of all, I would mention the Spain game because I honestly thought Japan played really well today. Canada played well. They played better than they did against Spain. I think this tournament really comes down to the Spain game, which
Mhm.
was just the worst they played. But in both this game and the Spain game, both their losses, the common theme is definitely defense, right? Japan shot 54% from two today. And in the
40s.
Spain game, I'm just gonna look it up real quick. In the Spain game, Spain shot um okay, not actually as well as I thought they shot, 34%. So
But
yeah,
but also, I mean, I thought as much of that was just also the offense down the stretch in both those games, right? Like Canada didn't,
yeah,
in the last was it 440 of the Spain game, and then today they didn't score really down the stretch until Kayla Alexander. They had those two turnovers. I don't know if one was a travel, but either way, they
yeah,
really stopped going to Carlton, who had started to play really well in the down the stretch, and just some mystifying plays and not very good offense. And I think that's also in tandem with poor defense. It almost
yeah,
felt as though their offense was good in the first half, but their defense was terrible, and then the roles flipped a little bit in the second half, and just
yeah,
late game situations, their offense just ran in the mud, and they couldn't get
yeah,
anything going. And some,
yeah.
yeah, and I think, I mean, it's captain obvious to say, but missing Kia Nurse was just so huge. I really do believe if Nurse plays, they win both those games and Canada
Yeah.
the Olympics.
No, like you said, both of those games came down to the last 5 minutes and the clutch time. The reason I bring up the Spain game is because, like,
Mhm.
okay, they didn't play as bad defense as I remembered. Spain only scored like around 60 points, but I think Victor this whole tournament had a lot of trouble finding lineups that did both. To your
Yeah,
point of like scoring in the late game, he really favored these defensive lineups with Amahir, Sammy Hill, Pellington even got in the game, but those aren't scorers, right? But then when he put out his like scoring units, the defense was terrible in this tournament. So I think the balance just he could never find it. The starting unit was pretty good in terms of that balance, but in this game you saw Chanwa and Shea Colley both I think foul out, or Chanwa didn't foul out, but she had
but
four and she had to sit on the bench. So the starting lineup got in trouble. The bench came in. He went to a more defensive minded unit with Sammy Hill and Amahir, and they couldn't score. And then there were other times in this tournament where they went to these offensive units and they couldn't defend. So, like you said, Kia, she's definitely more of an offensive player at this point
yeah.
in her career post injury, but she's a smart defender. She's a two-way player. So if they had her to that point, like I think they would have been able to find those lineups a lot easier than they did in this tournament. And yeah, it just they couldn't find that balance. And the second thing I would say is like Victor, since he took over, his teams have been known for playing extremely hard and being very organized and just executing on both ends. And it was kind of weird to see them just not execute on either end of the floor in this tournament.
Yeah, no, there's multiple times. I don't want to question uh effort, but there was a couple times where, especially in this game, I really noticed where on in transition, people weren't tracking back and they were
Mm-hmm.
just discombobulated a lot of
Mm-hmm.
the times. And that goes to the playing really hard all the time and also the communication and being well organized. And it didn't, as you mentioned, they really weren't organized, it felt like, at all in this tournament, really at obviously in spurts they had nice runs, but it never really felt as though they were a cohesive unit. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that shows the fact that they couldn't find a 5 man or 5 woman group that really worked well together on both sides. And it's just a real shame because there's a very good likelihood that we're looking at this team not making the Olympics, and they're ranked fifth in the world right now. And it's really a shame, especially with the men's finally breaking through, and the women's team has been old reliable for so long. And I don't know what you think about this. I talked about it on other shows, but do you feel it's almost uh the collision of maybe two different age cohorts where there's a lot of young players coming up, but maybe just a bit too young, and then the veterans are maybe getting a bit too old, and there's not a lot of players in that middle in their prime as there were in past cycles?
Well, I wouldn't say there's not a lot of players, but the NCAA players couldn't go. Like I know Aaliyah Edwards tried to convince UConn to let her go, and that wasn't happening. So like if you had Aaliyah Edwards in this tournament, right?
That's
Then
huge.
yeah, it would have been huge. And there's Cassandra Prosper. There's a number of players who are in the NCAA right now who really would have played big minutes for this team. So I don't know if like they don't have that
Mm.
age group, but just the way that these tournaments are set up is that either yeah, it's weird. Like either you're gonna get the NCAA players in certain windows, or you're not gonna get the pros in other windows during the summer. So yeah, I wouldn't say like they have a problem in terms of mixing the age groups. From everything I understand, like the camaraderie and the
Yeah,
welcoming
no,
environment is really well.
I didn't mean more as a problem in terms of cohesiveness. I meant more just the fact that some players are at some different points in their careers, and it's,
Hmm.
you think about like in the NBA, like the timelines. It felt like the
Yeah.
timelines are a bit at different places. So it wasn't about camaraderie. It was
Okay,
more
okay.
about the timeline type where you have a lot of 19, 18, 20, 21 year olds and then a lot of 30-year olds. And outside of Carlton and even Kia Nurse, who didn't play, they don't have a lot of players that are like 25, 24, like established players, but
Yeah.
also, but maybe that's just my take. You're the
No, I think that's right in terms of when you look at what they asked the young players to do, they couldn't do it. Like
yeah.
for whatever reason, the moment was too big for people like Silas Swords, who, hey, that's fair. She's like 17. Yvonne Ejim couldn't play in this tournament. Shayna Pellington couldn't really affect games. So their bench just did not give them enough. Amma here, kind of the same problem she's had for a while is defensively, she's great. Offensively, she gets out of her role at times. She had that big turnover late in the game. Like she needs to and Victor talked to me about this before the tournament. Like he's
Mm.
been stressing the role, like setting screens, rolling to the rim, like keeping it simple on offense. And because she has so much talent, I think she often does a little bit too much. So yeah, I think the young people that were asked to play big roles on this team were disappointing largely and couldn't really affect the game. And you mentioned Bridget Carlton earlier. She played 38 minutes tonight. This was also a theme in the Spain game. She's really their only person who can consistently create her own shot.
Yeah.
And she just got worn out in both games. Like she had a big run in her in both games. And then by the end, they stopped going to her. And I'm watching the game thinking like run something for Bridget. I also think she's just tired and
Yeah.
she doesn't have the juice to run anything. So yeah, they just didn't have enough like juice overall on either end. And I guess you could just say depth is like a better way of
Mhm.
saying that.
And that's the thing that we already talked to, is that they don't even have their full roster even available without Aaliyah Edwards. And obviously Nurse was injured, but just even you have Edwards, you think that probably gets you over the line in probably these two games, even just as on the bench or or wherever that
Hmm.
she's playing, but she's probably playing what, like 20 minutes a game, give or
For
take, right?
sure.
And that's a
At
huge pool
least,
that,
yeah.
yeah, you could
Yeah.
arguably say maybe close to 30, but
Yeah.
overall, that's a huge loss. And that's something we don't need to go too big picture, but overall, that is something that's wrong with this format is that not everyone can play, especially in the NCAA. And you look at the men, and obviously they have their summers, so no one's technically unavailable, but NBA players and obviously players like to enjoy their summers as well. But it would be nice to for the women's game to have that ability where it's not just hoping, but at the same time, obviously the WNBA plays in the summer too, so there is obviously complications, but um,
Yeah.
it's just tough to see it that way too.
Yeah, it's like it's this thing, this push and pull that Canada basketball has always had with the NCAA. And I know that Victor, like his main thing is like he wants people to fight like Yvonne Ejim did to like get released and to come to these tournaments.
Hmm.
And certain schools are more lenient than others for sure. But like, in like Spain, for example, there's like a clause in all the contracts that if there's a national team window, the school or the club has to release you,
Mm,
right? And like in Canada, we don't have that kind of structure, and that's what like Canada basketball wants to fight for. So you have people like Ejim fighting and getting released. Cassandra Prosper in November missed games with Notre Dame to play with Canada. But for the most part, whether it's women not pushing hard enough or just schools pushing back too hard, they're not getting their best talent for these tournaments. And yeah, hopefully in the years to come, they do create a bit of a culture where, and look, if they miss out on the Olympics, I guarantee next Olympic cycle, like there will be a bit of a more push against those universities.
mm,
They did not expect to miss this Olympics. So
yeah.
maybe that's the thing that changes it for Canada and the culture of like getting the best players out, but it is a hard push and pull with the system for
What
sure.
what just to go off that, how big of a disappointment do you think it would be to not make the Olympics and how big of even not just that, but a setback really for the program that's been so consistent for so long?
It's a setback for sure for a number of reasons. One is money. Like Canada basketball is always fighting for money to support their athletes best they can. And I know when the men qualified for the Olympics, they were relieved that they could set up all these sponsorships ahead of time and get all these deals done. For the women's program, it's gonna hurt their pockets if they're not going to the Olympics for sure. But the other is just like practice, getting a lot of these young players, especially reps against even Bridget Carlton, who's in her middle of her career, like reps against the best teams in the world at the Olympic stage. Like there's literally nothing better you can do for a program is to get those reps in. So definitely a huge setback in terms of the disappointment. I think like they definitely expected to do better in this tournament. Um, Talking to Victor and the girls ahead of time, it was a lot of confidence for sure in terms of like we feel good, like this is our year, like those kind of things we're saying. At the same time, I know Victor would have liked to have more time with the team leading up to this tournament. And I also know he would have liked to have all his best players available. So when you look at it objectively, um, they didn't have a ton of time leading up with at least with all the players. Like Yvonne Ejim, for example, joined them 2 days before games,
Yeah.
and they didn't have all their best players. So in that sense, it kind of is what it is, I guess.
Do you think some of that is just the fact that they weren't, they took it maybe a bit too lightly this tournament and like everyone named the group of death and maybe there's a bit of overconfidence there?
I don't think they took it too lightly. I just think, again, it goes back to the system. It is what it is in terms of you can only get so much time with these pros during their seasons in Europe. You can only get so much time with these NCAA players. So they're very limited in that sense in terms of the preparation. They did what they could, I know, but like they're just limited by the system in place. in terms of the group of death, they definitely got a bit unlucky with Hungary beating Japan. Like, I didn't watch that game. I don't know if you did, but that was a
A
bit
little
of a
bit.
shocker.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
it was. Yeah,
right. So like I thought after they beat Hungary, like they're kind of in the clear here. But then Hungary beats Japan and it kind of throws a whole wrench into the whole thing. So yeah, a little bit unlucky and a little bit just maybe unprepared,
yeah, no,
compared to these other teams at least.
yeah, for sure. And everything seemed to really fall apart, right? And the way the Spain game ended, obviously being up late and then boom, falling apart a little bit. And then same here where they didn't really regain the lead in the fourth quarter, but they cut it back and tied it a little bit. So overall, just everything went the wrong way. And then the out of town scoreboard was really not kind, right? Even Japan beating Spain, that changes a lot of things, even for Spain going into, or
Mm,
Japan going into the Hungary game
mm,
and everything. So it really, really hurt them. And there's still a chance at the same time, right? Like Spain's the better team compared to Hungary, but Hungary's a really good team and obviously playing
mm.
with a shot at the Olympics on the line. I'm a bit terrified of thinking about that, but
At
on
home, right?
yeah, in
Yeah,
a very ravenous or just amazing crowd. So, but Spain is the better team. So on paper, if Spain plays their players like decent minutes, it should be a Spain win. You never know.
yeah.
They probably match up pretty well against Hungary, and I can see why Hungary, like watching that game, was they were just a really tall team and took advantage of Japan's small size, and that won't be the same case against Spain too. So, um, fingers crossed, but it will be a big setback, but.
Yeah.
Yeah, it just would have been so nice to see the men and women both at the Olympics at the same time and both with a chance, arguably, to get a medal. Um, I'd probably say Canada, the men's team, probably had a better chance slightly, but either way, obviously, this group came forth at the World Cup in 2022 was amazing. That
Hmm.
best ever placement at a World Cup. So yeah, it's pretty heartbreaking, and I really think for the
Yeah.
women that like Natalie Achonwa, Kayla Alexander, that's probably the last run, and both of them played amazing. And shout out to Kayla Alexander because she was by far Canada's best player the whole tournament. She was averaging 16 and 13 going into the game today, and I think she had 16 and 14. I need to double check, but she had 16 and 14. I got it right. But just for those two players not to see the Olympics one last time, and Achanwa being a mom now, and it would
Yeah.
have been, it's going to be tough to see if that's their last time playing for Canada.
Yeah, that would, yeah, like a Chanwa. Yeah, I've been thinking about that. Kayla's 33 years old as well. So you're probably right. And also like their pipeline of centers in terms of Kayla is kind of limited. Like there's not that clear replacement in terms of that like shot blocking five. So again, I don't want to be too pessimistic because, like you said, Spain could still win and they could still get in here. But regardless, at this point, if they qualify or not, it was just a disappointing tournament. And like you said, Kayla was definitely one of the brighter spots. Other than that, I guess Achanwa impressed me a little bit, just given everything she's coming back from and the fact that she hasn't played a lot of basketball recently. She was pretty steady throughout. Other than that, though, like Carlton gave it her all, but she played better at the World Cup, I would
Yeah,
say.
yeah. I would say
And yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna say I thought this was for the most part her best game of the tournament by far,
Hmm.
and they needed that, which was nice to see. I was a bit worried after the first quarter where it felt as though they were hanging on for dear life and she wasn't playing well, but she really played so well today. But at the end of the day, yeah, it's gonna be tough. But I think what you said
Yeah,
was right. It is they don't have that center depth as well going forward, and um, those two of Alexander and Natalie Achonwa have been just the faces of this program, have shown up literally every time they could. have, and it'll be a big loss. I mean, maybe they continue with the program. I'm not saying no, but it's almost for sure in the case of Alexander, her last Olympic cycle, right? She'll be
Yeah.
37 in 2028 in LA. So yeah, it's sad, and but there is a lot of crop of great young players, especially I don't know if
Yeah.
people know, but um the U19 team last summer came third, and there's a lot of really good players. You mentioned Prosper, Fournier, obviously Silas Swords, other players as well. So there is like a group coming
Yeah.
for 2028 if they don't make it, but this will really sting if they don't.
Yeah, and again, it's like look at the veterans like Shea Colley and Nira Fields. They're both like late 20s, 30s. So maybe they'll be at the next Olympics, but they'll be at the end of their career. I think when you look at those two and Hill and Carlton and just kind of it feels like everyone needed Kia there to be pushed down into their rightful
Mm,
spot in the pecking order on offense, and they all just looked a little bit overburdened. And then when you look at the future, I think the future front court as of now look kind of like Amahir Edwards front court. But yeah, like Amahir has so much potential and has always been spoken of as like the future of Canadian basketball. And she's only 22 years old. So like on one hand, I want to like be fair. And she's also dealt with just a lot of stuff off the court in recent years. And I know that always affects people, but um I just am curious to see how her game rounds out because the defense is obvious. Um, but at times she just looks lost offensively. And if she ever puts it together, whether that means like adding a jump shot or just like being a rim runner, um, good screen setter, like if she ever puts it together on that end, she can be an amazing player.
hmm
Um, but who knows? It just feels a little bit like her game has stalled out in the last couple of years. But again, she's 22, so who knows? And her and Edwards and Cassandra Prosper, like that's a great front court to have. And going back to like how this is a little bit of a setback. Like I know 2028 was always their goal in terms of like medaling at an
mm,
Olympics. And but I think that they also said that in mind, like we're gonna be there in 2024 and working towards that there. So yeah, it would be a huge setback in terms of like that's been their publicly stated goal for a while now.
yeah, no, for sure. And it's interesting with Emma here. Like even on defense, she's a bit lost. Isn't great off the ball. She's very good on the ball, as you mentioned, just because she's such a great athlete. But with the stalling a little bit in her development, I definitely see that as well. Just not maybe processing the game at the level you'd want. But at the same time, she's only 22. She's going through a lot as well off the court. And but it will be interesting if she kind of flourishes and takes the leaps that she can with the talent that she has. That could be a huge difference maker for Canada that you look at the rest of the roster, you don't really feel like there's going to be this big jump by a player to really change the whole dynamic of this team. But with her, you could definitely see that more than really anyone else.
Yeah, the other people I would point to is Prosper. She's only
Hmm
in her second year. She went to Notre Dame early, basically did 3 years of high school, so she's young, and I see a ton of potential in her in terms of as a shot creator, a
hmm
ball handler. I think there's a lot of room to grow there. She's already a big wing who can defend and knock down threes. And then coming up through the system, I think like point guard play is a question going
Yeah.
forward. Cheyenne Wilson is a really interesting one to keep an eye on now at Miami. She's having a good season, but she's also never played for the senior team, and I think there's a reason for that in terms of her decision making. So she's one to keep an eye on. So yeah, I think there's a lot of talent coming up through the system.
Mm-hmm.
They have to be able to merge those two age groups if it's ever gonna like work at the highest level. But yeah, like as disappointing as this result is, I think the future of the program is still in really good hands.
Yeah, I think what's interesting that you said is the point guard play. And in this tournament, you really felt that they didn't have a lot of creators, like not just to get
Hmm.
the shot, but also to create for others, right? Now
Hmm.
Fields struggled, well, was very turnover prone, but didn't create a lot. Collie had her moments, but you didn't really feel like there was someone facilitating easy baskets really throughout the whole
Hmm.
tournament. And there isn't necessarily that point guard coming up. And even with Kia Nurse, like she's more of a scorer first
Hmm.
guard than a facilitator. So that's something that will be interesting to see because they don't have that floor general that a lot of other teams have, and that's a bit worrisome for the program. But it feels as though it really, outside of the point guard position, maybe the five, they're really set with, Swords as a two. They have a bunch of power forwards, a couple
Hmm.
threes. Like
Hmm.
they have a lot of depth in this program at those positions. But if they can find someone to play the five and to be really a point guard going forward, that might really expedite this, next step for the program going forward with the
Yeah.
younger players.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Yeah. Is there, before I let you go and the Spain versus Hungary game has started. It's tied early in the first quarter. It's 2-2, so I don't think we can really glean much about the game. But is there anything else that you'd want to say about just this loss and how how much it impacts the program?
Yeah, I think we covered mostly everything, honestly. Um, Again, it's disappointing that some of the younger talent couldn't step up in Kia Nurse's absence. Some of the veteran talent just kind of did what we expected of them, but didn't really take that leap that they had to. And just a little bit of cohesion was missing in comparison to especially a team like Japan, who just looked like they'd been playing together for years and knew what they wanted to do and executed it at a really high level. Canada's execution was maybe the worst we've seen since LaPena took over. So
Is that
it
a
was a,
point of criticism just with him, like that questions should be raised around his job or
I don't think so, no. Because like I said, it's been consistently good. Like it's been consistent execution, it's been consistent. They play really hard. This tournament was the exception to the rule, so I don't think you look to like fire a guy based on an exception, as important of a tournament as it is.
yeah.
Um, but that's why I bring it up is because it is weird that they played in a way that kind of looks like they were just thrown together at the last minute,
Hmm.
when in reality they weren't. The only real thing that happened last minute was Kia Nurse going down.
Yeah.
So yeah, in that sense, it was disappointing. I know they expect better than themselves. They will be disappointed more than we will. But I also think there's enough evidence out there that LaPena is a good coach.
Yeah.
And so I think he should definitely get to see the program through for at least a couple more years.
Yeah, and people might not
Um,
remember just how what happened in 2020 or 2021, I guess, and how the women really failed and flailed out of the Olympics, right? And losing so early on, not making out of the group stage, and that program that with the old coach Tomaitis, it felt as though the program was kind of spinning its wheels and not really going forward. And now it feels like, at least for the most part, outside of this tournament, it really felt as though this team was going in the right direction. So obviously the Olympics might be the most important thing to make. So not making
yeah,
that is definitely an indictment, but that'll be interesting to see is if he continues, does he become a little bit on the hot seat? Is he the coach for going into 2028? A lot of questions to be asked, and I know I'll be asking you about them because you're a bit of an insider in that regard. So, thanks so much, Oren, for doing this. And yeah, let's Spain's up right now by 2 points, so I'm clamoring to that and saying that Spain will win, and then hopefully when this podcast comes out, we can be happy and that the Olympics are still there, and will be an exciting summer either way for Canada basketball. But thanks so much for doing this, Oren.
for sure. No, go Spain. Do it for Victor, do it for your
Yeah,
boy.
yeah, for
Thanks for having me.
Jordy.
This was fun. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks so much. Is there anything you want to plug before I let you go?
Not really. I guess I did a couple pieces for this tournament, one on Yvonne Ejim, one on Letitia Amy here, both at Sportsnet, if people are interested in learning more about those players who will be a big part of the future of the program for sure. So yeah, you can go read those. Always find me at Twitter at Oren Weisfeld. That's it.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Oren, and we'll see you on the other side.